Hello, people of the internet. My name is JD Shadow, and probably by now you will know that I am left of center and I'm more or less a liberal. However, that doesn't blind me from some things that some people say on the left that kind of gets under my skin. And even people who I agree with 99% of the time, there's that one thing they end up saying that makes me want to go and say, huh? What? Why are you saying that kind of stuff? And why are you picking this fight? Case in point, Bill Mahar. Now, I agree with a lot of what he says. I agree with a lot of what he brings to the table as far as it pertains to how liberalism is a good thing for the most part, but we do need to stop fighting amongst one another and stop a civil war that seems to be brewing and some people on the left seem to want. However, you may have heard about a recent blog post that he made about the death of Stan Lee. And you'll no doubt understand that he was kind of not really a Stan Lee fan. As a matter of fact, he was seemingly making fun of people who liked comic books and video games and stuff like that. Well, on a recent episode of Real Time with Bill Mahar, he decided to double down on this whole idea. And I want to bring my 2 cents in. I want to bring up my response because I don't think he's just wrong in the way of his opinions are wrong, and I disagree with him full-heartedly on a fundamental stance, but he is also factually wrong about a few things. But if you did not watch what he said on his show Real Time, I will link the video in the description below this video. He is not shy about it in the slightest. Basically, what he said is that while he is not glad that Stan Lee is dead, he is quote-unquote unhappy that you are alive, meaning that some people got really wrapped up and started to throw vitriolic statements at him for what he said about it, which, yeah, I do agree that's a little bit too much. Why in the world is it that we always gotta go to that demeanor? Why we always gotta go to that depth? Why we always gotta go that low? I don't understand why it is that we have to get that vitriolic about things that we should, okay, I disagree with you and here are my points as to why I disagree with you. Why do we have to be immature about it? I don't get why that always has to come down to this. Why we always have to be that sensitive about it. And sure, there is a point where you seem to get very frustrated because somebody else might not be willing to even listen to what you got to say and still double down on what they're saying. But in this sense, I think that he just didn't understand the point. So after what I heard him say on this show, my whole idea was thinking of him as Grandpa Simpson and the old man yells at cloud bit. And yeah, it seems like the cloud had Stan Lee on it. So let's go through this whole editorial and let's go into what exactly he said and what my thoughts are on it. Basically what he was saying that, hey, you need to grow up. And that comic books and video games are more or less kid stuff. That they do not hold the same amount of intellectual writing that inspires critical thinking cannot be in comic books. It cannot be in these newfound pieces of entertainment. And if you want to talk about things like social justice and how comic books can, in a sense, teach people about that sort of thing, then there are better ways to go about it than geek culture and about superheroes. And he brings up a open letter that Stan Lee's PR team sent to him that basically brings up the factually wrong side of this that he ends up saying. The quote that he points out saying that you have a right to your opinion that comics are childish and unsophisticated. Many said the same about Dickens, Steinbeck, Melville, and even Shakespeare. To which he said, no, they are not. There's no way they can be childish and or unsophisticated. Now, I'm going to get to the reasons why he is factually wrong here in just a moment, but let's talk about what comic books actually are and how they have evolved over time. First things first, we can no doubt safely say that these are not just child's play. There are comic books that are geared toward more mature audiences, has anyone ever read Watchmen or have ever watched Deadpool before? Obviously, Bill Mahar has no idea about these comic books or about these movies, or else he would say something completely different. Or maybe he wouldn't, because again, there is another side to this that I think we need to talk about, and I will get into that even later on in this video. However, if you want to talk about stuff that has influenced things over time, also keep in mind that our needs and our ways of getting points across have changed, and artistic visions have changed. It has evolved over time. We haven't stopped creating new things. We haven't stopped thinking about new ideas. For instance, the notion of comic books and stuff like that, like Superman, was created in the 1950s, 1940s, 1950s. It has lasted that long. They are obviously doing something right. It has standed the test of time. It has gotten through the comics code of the 1960s, 1970s, where it became way too restrictive to some people who were living in that point in time. It had withstood some of the more darker ages and some of the points in time where they had to evolve, in which the people who used to read comic books were now growing up, and then the comic books had to grow up with them. They had to put in more mature subject matter. They had to put in more sexual scenes and more graphic scenes. These are not just kid-friendly comic books. There are kid-friendly comic books out there, but there are also scenes in these comic books that deal more with mature subject matter, and it understands the audience. It understands what the audience might be going through and the real life situations that some people do go through, and they imitate that. Art imitates life, or life imitates art, whichever way you want to go about that. The bottom line is that a lot of emotional outlets are found inside not only comic books, but within online entertainment, video games, and stuff like that. You have to understand it. And in this sense, it does seem like that Bill Mahar does not completely understand why people get into these sort of mediums. It does not seem as though he wants to get it. It does not seem like he wants to understand this. And he opts to keep his mind closed to this whole idea of, why do grown-ups like comic books? Why do they like comic book superheroes and these comic book superhero movies? Keep in mind the fact that Infinity War broke so many records. It broke so many box office records. It stayed in theaters for what I believe might be 2 months. I saw it in my local theater for 2 months after the initial release, before it finally left theaters and was set to get ready for a Blu-ray release. It stayed in there that long, and it stayed on the top of the box office movies for a good amount of time. It is not like people didn't want to see it and only kids went to see it. It was a rated PG-13 movie. It did have profanity in it. It had a good bit of violence in it. So saying that, hey, these are not sophisticated types of entertainment is just baffling. It is just seemingly untrue. It is just not there. That argument just does not work, because there are comic books that are geared toward a more mature audience. It is centered toward a more mature audience. It is designed that way. That's what they're there for. To say to an older crowd, hey, we understand you like this sort of medium, so we're going to create this sort of comic book geared especially toward you. But the other reason why he is completely wrong on this sentiment is when he goes into why people would dress up as their favorite superhero or anime character or cosplay as them and go into these festivals and things like that. And this goes into the main reason why people enjoy comic books, why people enjoy video games, why people enjoy these types of mediums. It is because it is their way of escaping the reality of what is going on. Almost every single day right now, we hear about the latest in who sexually harassed or assaulted somebody, or we hear the latest thing that Donald Trump has done, or the latest shooting, or the latest mass murder. And it is a very depressing world right now, especially lately. And to many people, that has nothing on their personal lives of what's going on within their house and what is going on with their financial situation. And because of that, they look for a means of escapism. They look for a means in order to go into a world and immerse themselves into a world where those types of problems don't exist at that point in time. And at least for those few hours in which they have the opportunity to be immersed into another world, that is therapeutic to them. Like, for instance, I play video games a hell of a lot, and that is because that for that amount of time, I am feeling like I am escaping from the reality of what I have to do, or what my personal situation is. Same with when I watch something like MMA, or when I watch an anime, or something like that, or when I'm recording a video for you guys. I feel like that I am either escaping from my real life stuff, or that I am able to express myself, to be able to tell you how I feel, or be able to get the words out that I want to say, sort of like this video right now. To those people, that is their escape. That is how they choose to say, okay, I want to forget about my real life responsibilities for a little bit. I want to have some fun. I want to let loose. I want to be able to take a bit of edge off of myself. I need to relax. I need to have some time where I'm not thinking about Donald Trump 24/7, or whether or not my bills are going to be paid on such and such a date, or whether or not my kids are going to be able to have clothes on their backs, or something like that. That I don't have to worry about if I'm going to live to the next day. And plus, what about those people who feel as though they connect to a particular character that they wish they could be, even for just a moment? And for them to cosplay as them, they feel as though they have become that person who they wish they could be for just that moment. And to entertain other people who also might be going through a lot, or might need that moment in which they don't have to worry about their own personal problems, or they can be happy, they can leave happy, they can be excited, they can say, hey, it's not that bad, the world's not that evil, or they're not thinking that the world's gonna crumble down. There are people around that do enjoy the same things that you do. There are people around there that understand you, that get you, that like the same things you do. Some people who go to these conventions meet their significant other. They meet their life partner, for more or less. And that is because they already do feel like they're kind of outcasts, that they are old enough to have grandchildren, and yet they do enjoy these types of things, and they are being told already by other people who are already stereotyping them that they are too old to be liking these types of things. And now Bill Mahar is reinforcing their stereotypes for whatever reason he has. For whatever reason he has to double down on this in a vacuum. Remember, this was not something he was asked to comment on in the first place. The death of Stan Lee, he didn't exactly have to talk about it. No one's really asking him right then and there what his thoughts were about Stan Lee's death. Although he could have said, hey, he was a nice person, I didn't really understand the medium that he was in, but yeah, I do understand that people did like his stuff, and thus I do understand that people will be saddened by the loss of a iconic creator. But not only did he choose to do this in the first place, but he chose to double down on it as if he still doesn't get it. Not to mention that he, for one, calls Pokemon Pokemon as if he's stuck in 1997 and no one knows the name of that popular franchise by now. He also does talk on video game addiction, which is a very real thing. However, he also makes the claim, albeit in a backwards way, that only males do play video games, and we've seen time and time again that is not the case. Especially now that I've seen that women will probably want to play against the men, and they would probably not want to, get into the sack either before they hit the next level in Fortnite, a game that he references time and time again as if that's the only game that anybody ever plays. Or perhaps helping her in Fortnite would make her a happy wife, and therefore you get a happy life. Or maybe, the husband equivalent to that, whatever it might be. Just saying that women play video video games just as much as males do, and in my case, sometimes they play a hell of a lot better than men do. So yeah, we're also enforcing that stereotype. Thanks a hell of a lot, Bill. And this is not just about Stan Lee. This goes something much further, because he also gets something factually wrong when he talks about that no one criticized. And yeah, we were talking about they weren't criticized. Shakespeare and Moby Dick, they were criticized, especially Shakespeare. There were some mixed reviews about Moby Dick, and you can talk about how the Americans differed from the British when they were talking about the book when the book first came out, and there are some mixed opinions about what exactly they were saying. However, if you go onto a website, mentalfloss.com, they have an article entitled 5 Writers Who Really Hated Shakespeare. And the 5 writers who have said that they didn't like him or the type of stories that he put out are a list of who's who in the literary world, including Leo Tolstoy, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, who you might know is writing the book War and Peace. That big thing. George Bernard Shaw was another one. He was a critic in the London newspaper Saturday Review, and he echoed Voltaire, who definitely did not like him. But the one person that stood out to me in that list was J.R.R. Tolkien. Now, if you don't know who he is, you might be living under a rock, because he's kind of the person who created a particular series called Lord of the Rings. And yeah, I don't know why the people who created that open letter did not mention him. I don't know why they did not. But if you read throughout those texts, and I'm not going to go through all of this because I don't want to make this into too long of a video, you will understand that he did have his critics. Now, you can disagree with whether or not they were valid opinions, they were valid criticisms, but the fact of the matter is that it is severely untrue that Shakespeare and those other writers were never criticized, were never called childish or unsophisticated. There were people who saw those kinds of writings as unsophisticated, and they did have their critics in the literary world. That is severely untrue. It is factually untrue. That is not my opinion. That is not anybody's opinion. That is a fact that they were criticized. Whether or not you agree with the criticism, the fact of the matter is that they were not the greatest things of all time. They had their critics. They had their naysayers. There were negative criticisms about some of their work, especially with Shakespeare, in which there were a few plays that he made that people looked and like, wait a minute, why did you make this again? What was going on there? But you might notice that he didn't say anything about Game of Thrones, in which a lot of people sit after the show on online vlogs and talk about what happened. Young Turks has a show dedicated to Game of Thrones. The Walking Dead had a show right after called The Talking Dead, in which they talked about what just happened. And they talked about theory crafting about what just occurred and what they think will happen, or what could happen to the characters. So which characters did they trust or not trust, or what was behind everything, or who was behind everything. If you want to talk about things that people believe are childish, you have to go all the way. Why is it that you don't touch upon those things? Why is it that you don't think those things are childish, but yet comic books and video games are? Why is that? Well, I have a bit of an idea as to why. It is because I do believe that there is another person at play. And I don't want to think this about Bill Mahar, because he does seem like the type of person who would not let corporate meddling get in the way of his opinions. However, we do have to bring this up. HBO is owned by Time Warner. Time Warner owns not only HBO, but part of the CW, and they also have their own movie line, and they also have Time Warner Cable, which, for better or worse, is one of the top cable providers in the country. Recently, television cable especially has seen their viewership drop. Their subscribership has dropped. HBO has dropped because of this. Things like Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead are television shows, but we've seen things like Netflix and Hulu and video on demand options take its hold against normal traditional cable providers, and you are seeing these cord cutters emerge more and more and more. I'm half tempted to do it myself anymore. And you're also seeing that these mediums like comic books and video games are winning the battle over traditional television. Obviously, they have to do something about it, but you have seen a really ridiculous and disgusting way about how they're doing it. Notice that anytime there is a school shooting or a mass shooting, one thing that keeps getting blamed are video games. Correlation does not equal causation, but it seems as though anytime we get a mass school shooting or whatever like that, any study that shows otherwise gets completely ignored because we are dealing with emotional aspects. We are dealing with people's emotions here, and when people are emotional, they will fall for anything, and I mean anything. Thus, when they hear, oh, it's the video games that made them do it, and people are looking for a quick and easy answer, that's how they will go. And these outlets are doing whatever they can in order to influence it, and they're using the blood of those people who have died in order to get what they want. And it is a very disgusting thing, and it's never going to stop unless it gets called out, and it will never get called out as long as people's emotions take control. I don't want to think this about Bill Mahar because he seems like a upfront kind of person. However, we have seen before that this kind of thing gets even the best of people. And plus, keep in mind that Time Warner also owns CNN. It is worthwhile to bring up because we all are trying to look for an answer as to why he would even bring up Stan Lee's death in this manner if there was nobody pressuring him to say something about his death. What is the end game here? What is the goal of this? And those are the only two things I can think of. Either he just completely does not understand about escapism and about showing that you have a kid at heart and stuff like that, or he's trying to serve a higher master here, and if it's the latter, then this goes much further and it becomes a much more serious situation because we all remember what transpired in 2014 and 2015, and we all know what that ended up causing. That is something that would have to be squelched right now. We could not be needing to waste any more time in bringing that up if it does seem like it is Time Warner who are pulling the strings for Bill Mahar to say these kinds of things. Because the reason why we take stuff like this seriously is because if we did not have these sort of mediums, then we don't have our escape. We don't have a way to take some of the edge off of what's going on in our daily lives. And where would we go for that? How would we be able to take off some of that edge? We would go crazy if we didn't have that kind of release, didn't have that kind of therapeutic release for ourselves. To say, hey, I'm going to escape into this book or into this comic book. Who cares how it's presented? The way it's presented is in a way that we can appreciate, that people talk like us, that they act like us. And if you want any more proof about how comic books can show just how in touch with real life they are, we all remember the horrific pictures and the horrific actions that were committed on September 11th, 2001. World Trade Centers collapsed at the hands of Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda. Untold amounts of men and women dead. First responders, as brave as they ever were, went into the line of fire and made the ultimate sacrifice in order to save countless lives who would have otherwise perished had it not been for their ultimate sacrifice. And not only that, but a group of passengers on Flight 93 stopped Al-Qaeda from doing any other damage by sacrificing themselves in order to stop another plane from heading to wherever they were headed toward, more likely the White House itself. It was a horrific, a terrifying time in our country. We did not know who to trust. We did not know what to do or what to say or what we could have done. And in the wake of all that, the Amazing Spider-Man put out a issue called the Black Issue, in which it depicted Spider-Man and Cyclops and Captain America trying to help the first responders in their own way. Marvel trying to do their best in order to show how they felt and how they were able to show us how they felt. And I will post a link to the Imgur account that has all of the panels in the description below this video. But there is one particular page out of all of these that rings very true into how comic books can actually tell us and show us that it's going to be okay. And that is the final page, in which it shows the Marvel superheroes, some of the most popular ones, standing tall with the men and women of law enforcement, of the firemen and the police, and the people who we wish we did not need to be brave, who are because some of us cannot be, or some of us are not powerful enough to be. If you want any proof of how Bill Mahar is completely backwards on this subject, look no further than this issue. It is one of the best issues of any comic I think we have ever seen, and it became so because of Madman, who decided that it was worth their time in order to hate us that much. And that's what comic books do. That's what these types of mediums do in ways that maybe even television cannot do, is to show to people it's going to be okay. It's going to be fine, because there is a place that will not only respect and accept you, but to tell you that despite all the problems that this world has right in the moment, it will get better. That we are here with you. We stand by you. And to some people, they need to be told that. They need to hear that. And those people who lost so much on that day, they needed to hear that, and they were able to hear that in a way that they understood it. That is the most important thing of all. In a way that we understand it, in a way that we get it. And to some of us, that is the way we get it. That's the way we get that message. And to anybody who says that we just need to grow up, maybe it's them who need to wise up. I'm JD Shadow. Good night and good luck.